So I want you to picture something for a second. Picture the floor of a recording studio, and it is just physically vibrating beneath your feet.
Okay, I'm with you. Like, really shaking.
Yeah, exactly. And right in the center of the room, there's this Mesa Boogie guitar amplifier. But it's cranked so unbelievably loud that the sheer acoustic force is causing the heavy wooden cabinet to literally jump off the floorboards.
Oh, wow. I mean, just the raw wattage of that.
Right. But here's the crazy part. If you trace the cable back from that roaring amplifier, you don't find a guitarist, wailing away on a Stratocaster.
You find a drum machine.
You find a sterile electronic drum machine, pumping out the synthesized beat, just being blasted with so much power that the gear is physically shaking.
Which is such an intense image.
It really is. And, if you had to guess who was making this aggressive, menacing, industrial wall of sound back in 1983, you might guess a punk band, right? Or maybe some underground avant-garde noise project.
You definitely wouldn't guess a band that, just a few years prior, was wearing these elaborate theatrical costumes and playing 20-minute songs in incredibly complex time signatures.
Exactly. You wouldn't guess Genesis.
But that is exactly who it was. Yeah. And it's one of the most unexpected sonic images of the entire decade, I think.
Right.
We're looking at a moment where a band completely shattered their own mold.
And that is the core of our deep dive today. I'm so thrilled to have you with us as we tear into this comprehensive documentation we have surrounding the band and their massive eponymous 1983 album, simply titled Genesis.
It's going to be a fun one.
Oh, absolutely. We're pulling from engineering notes, retrospective interviews, chart data, all these historical archives to understand how this trio, Phil Collins, Tony Banks, and Mike Rutherford, pulled off this unprecedented creative pivot.
Right. And the mission for you listening today is really to track an evolution. We're going to unpack how Genesis transitioned from the intricate, labyrinthine art rock of the 1970s into a state of absolute, undeniable 1980s pop dominance.
Which is no small feat.
Not at all. You're going to learn how a really potent mixture of bleeding-edge technology, completely altered band dynamics, and a sudden craving for musical simplicity birthed an absolute commercial juggernaut.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we really want to understand the sheer force of this 1983 album, we can't start in the studio. We have to start with the utter exhaustion the band was facing just prior to this.
Oh, yeah. The timeline heading into late 1982 paints a picture of a band running entirely on fumes.
Right.
I mean, fumes might even be an understatement. By October 1982, the core trio, along with their touring musicians, Chester Thompson on drums and Daryl Stuermer on guitar, they were wrapping up this grueling 2-month global tour.
2 months of just constant travel.
Yeah, crisscrossing North America and Europe to support their third live album, Three Sides Live.
And I mean, any touring musician will tell you that a 2-month stadium run will drain you physically. But the physical toll wasn't even the half of it, right? Because right in the middle of this massive commercial machine they were running, they hit the brakes.
They did. To perform a show known in their lore as Six of the Best.
Six of the Best, which is such a crazy anomaly in their history.
It really is fascinating.
Yeah.
It was a one-off reunion gig in Milton Keynes with their original frontman, Peter Gabriel, and their former guitarist, Steve Hackett.
But, and I think this is crucial, they didn't do this out of some, sudden wave of nostalgia, right? Or a desire to get the original lineup back together permanently.
No, not at all. This was an emergency rescue operation.
An operation to save Peter Gabriel from absolute financial ruin, if the archives are correct.
Precisely. So Gabriel had launched the Woman Festival, the World of Music, Arts, and Dance. And it was this beautiful, ambitious concept, but logistically and financially, the inaugural festival was just a catastrophe.
Just a total mess.
Gabriel was facing bankruptcy. He was staring down massive debts. So his former bandmates, despite having their own massive tour to worry about, they stepped in.
They really threw him a lifeline.
They did. They put aside years of musical differences, relearned all the old intricate songs they had long since retired, and played this massive benefit concert to bail him out.
I mean, think about the emotional whiplash of that situation for you as a listener. You are desperately trying to forge ahead, trying to establish your identity as a trio, and you're succeeding.
Right, you're playing stadiums.
Exactly. But suddenly you have to mentally time travel back 5 years. You have to resurrect a dynamic that you intentionally left behind just to save an old friend. And you're doing this all while maintaining the momentum of your current tour. It just creates a massive psychological strain.
It forces a severe identity crisis, really. Because when you go back and play the old material with the old lineup, you are reminded of everything you used to be.
Yeah, it casts a harsh light on what you're currently doing.
And after that emotional and physical marathon, the band just stopped. They hit a wall and initiated an 8-month period of total inactivity as a collective.
Which brings us to a really crucial dynamic shift. Because those 8 months, they weren't spent quietly recuperating on a beach somewhere.
No, they went their separate ways and poured their energy into solo projects.
And the results of those solo projects fundamentally changed the balance of power within the band, didn't they?
Completely. Phil Collins, in particular, wasn't just the drummer and singer of Genesis anymore. He had released Face Value and, hello, I must be going.
He was, like, rapidly ascending to global solo superstardom at that point.
Exactly. But Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford were also pursuing their own solo records and film scores. They were all finding success outside the band.
You know, I always think of this period like a group of lifelong friends who went to high school together.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, because in high school, they know every little quirk about one another. They know the unspoken hierarchy of the friend group. But then they graduate, they go away to different colleges, live in different cities, and achieve their own independent successes, right?
They grow up.
So if those friends decide to move back into a house together a few years later, the dynamic is completely different. They have to figure out if they even fit together anymore because they aren't the same people.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. They returned to the table in the spring of 1983 as highly autonomous, proven creators outside the Genesis umbrella.
So if they were going to make another album, it couldn't just be business as usual.
Exactly. The environment had to change. So instead of booking time at some high-end commercial facility in London, they reconvened at their newly acquired studio in Chiddingfold, Surrey, which they affectionately named The Farm.
The Farm. I mean, the name alone conjures up this pastoral, relaxed image. But the reality of what owning that studio meant mechanically and psychologically is massive for them.
What's fascinating here is the psychological effect of owning the space. Prior to this, they were trapped in the traditional album cycle.
Right. You write the songs in a cheap rehearsal room, you get them mostly finished, and then you pay exorbitant daily rates at a commercial studio to record them before your budget runs out.
And the ticking clock of a commercial studio is one of the most oppressive instruments a band has to deal with. When you are paying thousands of dollars a day, every mistake, every experimental tangent, every debate over a chord change feels like you are literally burning cash.
It forces a really rigid defensive posture. You rush, you just stick to the plan.
But owning the Farm completely short-circuits that pressure. They had the luxury of walking into a room equipped with state-of-the-art recording gear, accompanied by their engineer, Hugh Padgham, with absolutely zero timeline.
Yeah, they were self-producing, assisted technically by Jeff Collingham, and they could literally leave a microphone set up on a piano for a month if they wanted to.
That lack of pressure was essential. But it didn't guarantee instant brilliance, you know?
No, not at all. In fact, Mike Rutherford's recollections of those initial sessions at the Farm paint a picture of severe sluggishness.
Right, they were in this idyllic setting, but the progress was excruciatingly slow at first.
I mean, I just imagine the underlying anxiety in that room was suffocating. You've had 8 months apart, you've tasted solo success, you've bought this incredibly expensive studio, you sit down to play, and nothing happened.
You start wondering, did we lose it?
Exactly. Was the magic tied to the pressure we used to have? Do we even want to be in a band together anymore?
It's the ultimate test of their chemistry. But that anxiety broke on the third day. The historical notes pinpoint day 3 as a massive turning point.
Oh, wow. Just day 3.
Yeah, the dam broke, and they had an intensely productive session where they worked out the foundational elements for 2 or 3 songs almost simultaneously.
So what changed? I mean, did they just suddenly remember how to play together, or did they change the actual mechanics of how they were working?
It was a fundamental shift in their methodology. Tony Banks detailed a conscious, collective agreement they made for this album. They decided they were going to write and record the album in one go, from start to finish.
Now, I really need to press you on the logistics of that, because honestly, that sounds like a recipe for absolute disaster.
It does sound risky.
You're telling me a progressive rock band, known for sweeping 10-minute epics with distinct movements and pre-planned classical structures, just walked into a studio with zero pre-written material, no sheet music, no acoustic demos, nothing.
Nothing. Zero. In the past, someone like Banks or Rutherford would come in with a largely arranged piece. But when you bring a finished blueprint to the band, you instantly put the other members in a subordinate role.
Right, they just become session musicians playing your idea.
Exactly. And human nature dictates that you will aggressively defend your pre-written idea against their suggestions.
Which breeds those massive ego clashes we always associate with the 70s rock bands. If I spend 3 weeks writing a complex keyboard suite and Phil Collins says the tempo is wrong, we are going to fight about it.
Absolutely. But if you remove the pre-written songs, you remove the ego attachment entirely. They decided to rely entirely on studio jamming.
Just hitting record and seeing what happens.
Yeah. They would set up, hit record on the tape machine, and just improvise together in the room. Then they would listen back, find the moments where a groove naturally locked in, and build the songs from those raw collective sparks.
But again, isn't that incredibly dangerous? When bands try to just, jam out an album, you usually end up with hours of aimless, self-indulgent noodling.
Oh, yeah.
You get a band searching for a groove and never finding it. How did they avoid burning months of time just playing nonsense?
Well, that is a totally valid question, and it's the risk that ruins many bands. But Genesis possessed a secret weapon, which was a decade and a half of shared musical vocabulary.
Oh, right.
When they jammed, they weren't three strangers trying to figure out what key they were in. They were fluent in each other's musical habits. Banks knew exactly how Rutherford would respond to a chord change. Collins knew exactly where to place a drum fill to accentuate Banks's melody.
So their improvisation wasn't random at all. It was more like a highly educated conversation.
Exactly. It forced total presence. And for Genesis, this method kept the songs fresh and really unified the band. The sum became greater than the individual parts.
Because every single track was born from this collective improvisation. It created a unified front that they just hadn't experienced in years.
Which bleeds directly into how they handled the credits and the title of the record. For the first time since 1974's The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, they decided to credit all three members equally for the writing of the entire album.
No individual song belonged to Tony or Mike or Phil. They belonged to Genesis.
Right. And because the writing was entirely collective, they couldn't even agree on a title. There was no overarching concept or pre-planned narrative to name the album after.
So they just made the ultimate statement of unity and named it Genesis.
Exactly. Though there was a brief period during these early sessions where they toyed with pushing the boundaries of that unity even further. They briefly discussed the possibility of Tony Banks or Mike Rutherford taking on lead vocal duties for a few tracks.
Really? Just to shake up the dynamic? That would have been so jarring for the listener. Why did they abandon that idea?
Well, because the jamming process dictated the outcome. As they improvised these grooves, Phil Collins would step up to the microphone and sing dummy lyrics, just phonetic sounds and melodies, to establish a vocal rhythm.
Oh, gotcha. So the material was naturally developing around the specific timbre and range of his voice.
Exactly. It didn't make musical sense to force anyone else into the lead role when the songs were literally built under Collins' voice.
Yeah.
However, Banks and Rutherford did step up to provide much more prominent backing vocals throughout the album, which really reinforced that gang mentality.
I love that. So we have a band that has shed their egos, locked themselves in a relaxed environment, and committed entirely to improvising. But the music they created doesn't sound like a raw acoustic jam band.
Not at all.
It sounds incredibly futuristic. And that is because the studio itself, the farm, was functioning almost as a fourth member of the band. The technology they brought into that room fundamentally altered the DNA of their sound.
Oh, heavily fueled by it.
Yeah.
The year 1983 is a massive inflection point in the history of audio technology.
It really is.
The industry was straddling this line between the warm analog synthesis of the late 70s and the dawn of cold, precise digital sampling and drum machines. And Genesis was standing right on that fault line, utilizing both.
Let's look at the absolute arsenal Tony Banks had at his disposal. It is literally a museum of iconic gear. He's running the Prophet 10, which provides these massive, sweeping analog textures.
Classic sound.
He's got the Yamaha CP70 electric grand piano for bite and clarity and the ARP Quadra. But the true game changers in that room were the Synclavier and the EMU emulator.
We definitely have to stop and really dissect what those two pieces of equipment meant, because they changed the world. The Synclavier wasn't just a keyboard. It was an early digital synthesizer and a polyphonic sampling system.
And the EMU emulator was one of the first somewhat affordable, though still wildly expensive digital samplers, right? Now, for anyone who has grown up making music on a laptop today, Sampling is as natural as breathing. You literally just drag an audio file onto a timeline and you're done. But in 1983, how did this actually work? What was the mechanical process that Banks was exploring?
Okay, imagine the concept of freezing time. Before samplers, if you wanted the sound of a cello, you had to hire a cellist, put a microphone in front of them, and record them playing the part.
Old school.
Right. But a sampler allowed you to record a single note of a real-world instrument, or a car horn, or breaking glass, digitize that fraction of a second into computer memory, and then map that audio across a keyboard.
Meaning, if you press the middle C key, it plays the sound back at its original speed. But if you press a key an octave lower, the computer physically slows the audio playback down to drop the pitch.
Exactly. It stretches the audio like silly putty. You're taking a piece of the real world and turning it into a playable, malleable instrument.
And Banks wasn't just sampling traditional instruments. Here is where it gets really interesting. The archives reveal one of the most fascinating experiments on the record. They were pulling audio out of the pop culture ether.
Oh, the movie sample.
Yes. They utilized a sample taken directly from the soundtrack of Stanley Kubrick's 1968 film, 2001, A Space Odyssey.
They captured a choir sound from the film's score. But they didn't just use it as like a background texture. Phil Collins described the surreal experience of playing this sample polyphonically on the keyboard.
Right. He noted that when you play a chord with a sample like that, because of how the keyboard changes the pitch by altering the playback speed, half of the chord is playing the audio at half speed and the other half is playing it at double speed.
It's wild to think about.
You are taking a human choir and bending their voices through time in opposite directions simultaneously. Collins called the resulting sound beautiful, but it's also deeply unnatural.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, think about how modern music relies on sampling today. Genesis was on the bleeding edge of taking found sounds and manipulating them into new musical textures. It creates a sonic landscape that the human brain hasn't evolved to process naturally.
It's familiar, yet completely alien.
Exactly. And Phil Collins was undergoing his own technological revolution in that room, too. He was a world-renowned acoustic drummer, yet he began heavily transitioning to a Simmons electronic drum kit.
Oh, right, those iconic hexagonal drum pads that triggered synthesized explosive drum sounds.
Yeah, he integrated them heavily into his playing.
So we have all this bleeding-edge technology, time-bending samplers, digital workstations, electronic drum pads. But all of this theoretical talk of drum machines and sampling violently collides and culminates in what I believe is the most abrasive, shocking, and ultimately famous track on the record.
I think I know where you're going with this.
We have to dive into the anatomy of the album's lead single. We have to unpack Mama.
Mama is the thesis statement for this era of Genesis. If you want to understand how they married their dark, progressive roots with modern technology and pop sensibilities, it is all right here.
Absolutely.
And it begins with a piece of gear we haven't even discussed yet, the Linn LM1 drum machine.
Yes, the Beat. Mike Rutherford was experimenting with this machine. The Linn LM1 was revolutionary because it didn't just make electronic beep noises. It used actual digital samples of acoustic drums.
But Rutherford didn't just plug it cleanly into the mixing console, did he?
No. He engaged in an act of sonic sabotage. He fed it through a gated reverb and a Mesa Boogie amplifier.
And we hear the term gated reverb constantly when discussing the 80s, but let's break down the actual physics of what that means for the listener.
Sure. Normally, when you hit a drum in a large room, the sound bounces off the walls and creates an echo, a reverb. That echo naturally decays, slowly fading into silence. It gives your ear a sense of physical space.
It sounds natural.
Exactly. But a gate is an electronic processor that acts like a trapdoor. You set a volume threshold. As soon as the echoing sound drops below that specific volume, the gate instantly slams shut.
It cuts off the natural decay of the echo entirely.
So you get the massive, explosive beginning of a giant drum hit, but then the audio is sucked into an unnatural, instantaneous vacuum of silence.
It creates this suffocating, punchy, aggressive rhythm.
And then, as we painted that visceral picture at the start of the deep dive, Rutherford took that massive gated drum machine sound and pumped it through a guitar amplifier turned up so incredibly loud it was physically jumping off the studio floor.
I want you listening to just imagine the energy in that room. That menacing industrial heartbeat drives the entire 6.5-minute track.
And over that mechanical menace, Phil Collins delivers arguably the most intense, unhinged vocal performance of his entire career.
He sounds possessed. Where did he pull that vocal character from? Because it doesn't sound like the guy who's saying In the Air Tonight.
It was actually a very specific homage. Collins was deeply influenced by John Lennon's vocal delivery on a cover of the classic rockabilly song Be Bopalula.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Lennon used this distorted, delayed, almost creeping drawl. Collins channeled that sinister, sneering tone for the verses of Mama.
And then the tension breaks with the laugh. The famous ha ha ha.
Yes.
It is one of the most recognizable vocal hooks in rock history, and the origin story is wildly out of left field for a British prog rock band.
It speaks volumes about the relaxed, open-minded atmosphere at the farm. Their co-producer, Hugh Padgham, brought in a record that was sending shockwaves through the industry in 1982.
It was the hip-hop track, The Message, by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five.
Right, a foundational text of hip-hop. And in that track, there's this very specific, rhythmic, almost cynical laugh.
Collins heard that, and it stuck in his subconscious. Later, while they were jamming over Rutherford's jumping amplifier beat, Collins was improvising vocal melodies, and he just spontaneously mimicked that laugh.
It wasn't premeditated at all.
No, it was an organic reaction during an improv session. The band loved it. They instantly recognized that it perfectly encapsulated the dark psychology of the track.
But I have to imagine there was apprehension about capturing that lightning in a bottle.
There was significant concern. They had serious doubts about whether Collins could replicate that specific laugh on stage without destroying his voice. But despite those doubts about recreating it live, it stayed.
And thankfully, he managed to recreate it effortlessly, night after night. So we have the jumping drum machine, the Lennon vocals, the Grandmaster Flash laugh. But sonically, the track is still incredibly dense. Tony Banks is trying to find a keyboard sound that can cut through this.
Right, he needed something percussive, something with a sharp attack. He couldn't find the right percussive sound using traditional synthesizers.
So he turns back to the EMU emulator sampler.
He did. He sampled a Japanese koto through the emulator. It gave the track this sharp, metallic, synthetic, yet organic driving force.
It's brilliant. But let's look at the commercial gamble of what they created. They have built a dark, aggressive 6.5-minute song, and they decide this should be the lead single.
It was an unbelievable risk. Usually you want something upbeat, universally palatable.
Mike Rutherford noted his own surprise that their manager, Tony Smith, and the label executives actually agreed to release Mama as the lead single. He fully expected them to demand a safer track.
But it paid off massively. Mama rocketed up the charts, reaching number 4 in the UK.
Becoming their highest charting single there.
Exactly. Though it is worth noting, it stalled out in the US.
Yeah, America wasn't quite ready for it. But while Mama established an aggressive edge, a band can't sustain that level of darkness for an entire record. As we move into the rest of the album's first half, which Tony Banks referred to as the main act, we see the flip side of their evolution.
We see their newfound mastery of succinct, radio-friendly storytelling. This is the true pop pivot. Mike Rutherford admitted that they felt they had taken their 1970s progressive, art rock direction as far as it could logically go. They had climbed that mountain.
Which perfectly explains the second track on the album, that's all. If Mama is a dark storm, That's All is a Bright Bouncing Morning. It starts with a simple piano riff from Tony Banks.
That simple piano riff dictated the entire mood, and it demanded a specific kind of rhythmic support from Phil Collins.
Yeah, and the archives highlight a really universal influence on this track. Collins was paying direct tribute to Ringo Starr's drumming style.
Which means serving the song above your own ego. Collins adopts that slightly behind the beat, bouncing rhythm that the Beatles were so famous for.
But there is a wonderful piece of studio trickery here. Right after the bridge, there is a blistering organ solo. And here's a fun fact for you listening. That organ solo is actually a synclavier preset imitating a Hammond B3.
Really?
Yes. Even though the music video shows Tony Banks aggressively playing the exact opposite, a real vintage Hammond organ, it was all a digital illusion.
That is hilarious. But that illusion proved to be exactly what the American market was waiting for. It became their first U.S. top 10 hit, reaching number 6.
It solidified them as pop hit makers. But they hadn't entirely abandoned their theatrical roots, which brings us to a two-part suite that closes out side 1. Let's talk about Home by the Sea.
Oh, this is a great one.
I absolutely relish the narrative of this song. It's a ghost story. A burglar breaks into a house by the ocean, expecting to steal some valuables, but he gets captured by the ghosts haunting the house.
And his punishment is forced listening, right?
Yes. They force him to sit down and listen to their life stories for the rest of eternity. It's brilliant. But how did they come up with this?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how they were working, it perfectly illustrates their new jamming method. The song was born from Collins singing dummy lyrics over a Linn drum machine.
Just phonetic gibberish to find the melody.
Exactly. And the phrase he happened to sing was "Home by the Sea." That random phrase birthed the entire haunting narrative.
And the song seamlessly transitions into a massive instrumental powerhouse called Second Home by the Sea.
Right, the working title for this piece during the sessions was Heavy Simmons, which was a direct reference to Collins' heavy drumming on those electronic pads.
But the construction of this instrumental was literally a Frankenstein creation.
It was built by stitching together tape from two completely separate 2-hour jam sessions. They found a brilliant section in a Tuesday jam, another in a Thursday jam, and physically spliced them together.
And conceptually, the instrumental represents the past lives of the ghosts that the burglars forced to listen to. The music is the narrative.
Which is a brilliant way to wrap up the main act of the album.
So when you physically flipped the vinyl record over to side 2, the atmosphere changed. With the main act concluded, the band moved into what Banks called the character pieces.
This is where the lyrical and musical themes grew much more eclectic. They allowed themselves to play with different personas.
Now, the first of these character pieces is a track called Illegal Alien, and I want to be very clear here. This deep dive takes no political side whatsoever. We are strictly providing a neutral presentation of the source material.
Right, impartial reporting of the facts.
Exactly. So, looking purely at the documentation, this track features lyrics by Mike Rutherford about illegal immigrants attempting to cross the border into the United States for a better life.
Musically, this presented a unique challenge for Phil Collins. He noted that he initially struggled with it, trying various complex drum styles.
Yeah, he was overthinking it.
He was. Eventually, he settled on a basic rock and roll part, just hitting 2 and 4 on the snare. Meanwhile, Tony Banks is over there sampling car horns and telephones on his emulator, incorporating these real-world noises.
Now, regarding the reception of the song, the archives note that some listeners and critics perceived racist implications towards Mexicans in the song, specifically regarding the subject matter and the vocal delivery.
And how did the band address that at the time?
Well, again, neutrally reporting the facts here, Tony Banks addressed this directly in the press. He firmly denied any racist implications. He stated that the song was a tongue-in-cheek thing and was intended to be sympathetic towards immigrants.
That's fascinating to see how they navigated that pushback.
Moving forward into the back half of side 2, the tension releases completely with a track called Silver Rainbow.
And the origin story for this one is wonderfully lighthearted. The working title for this track was originally Adam.
Right, because the rhythm sounded like the 80s pop star Adam Ant.
Exactly. It had this bouncing rhythm. And Tony Banks wrote lyrics about people being senseless in love, which Collins later described as lush and romantic.
It's amazing how a drum beat that reminds them of Adam Ant evolves into this lush, romantic meditation on love.
It really proves the jamming method worked.
But the award for the most bizarre origin story on side 2 belongs to the final track. It's gonna get better.
Oh, this is a masterclass in how to embrace a mistake. Tony Banks tried to sample a cello from an Aram Khachaturian ballet suite to get a rich string sound.
But the sampling technology in 1983 was rudimentary. Getting a clean loop was tough, and it failed, right?
It failed completely. The loop was jagged and unnatural. But he didn't scrap it. He played 4 notes of that broken sample simultaneously.
And because of the jagged loop and the varying playback speeds, the samples began to overlap and go out of phase.
Exactly. He created an unexpected interweaving harmony that they kept for the intro, a polyphonic glitch that birthed a song.
So the band has finished this massive genre-shifting album. How did the world react? Let's talk about the packaging, release, and legacy.
The visuals are a great place to start.
The cover art was done by Bill Smith, who also did their previous album, Abacab, and the origin is delightful. The striking shapes on the cover were actually inspired by his 1-year-old son's shape sorter toy left on the carpet.
It's a perfect visual metaphor, taking basic shapes and presenting them in a modern context.
The album was officially released on October 3rd, 1983. And the commercial domination versus the critical divide is really telling.
The numbers are staggering. In the UK, it hit number 1 and stayed in the charts for 51 weeks. In the US, it hit number 9, selling over 4 million copies.
They released 4 singles, shot extensive music videos back-to-back for Mama and Illegal Alien. They were ubiquitous.
But the critical reception was highly polarized, illustrating the friction of a band changing genres.
Right. Stephen Thomas Erlewine from AllMusic criticized a lack of coherency, but he praised the balance of sleek pop and aching ballads.
Then you had Bill Black at Sounds Magazine, who called it a frustrating cocktail of formulaic pop and progressive reminders. Though he did compare It's Gonna Get Better to Cosmic Elgar, and he admitted he loved the savagery of Mama.
And then, surprisingly, Kerrang praised them for trading complexity for simplicity, calling it great music for the masses and an album for people who normally hate Genesis.
They even got Grammy recognition. Best Rock Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocal for the Album, and Best Rock Instrumental Performance for Second Home by the Sea.
So, what does this all mean? I want you listening to consider how Mike Rutherford himself views this as one of his favorite Genesis albums.
If we synthesize this journey, we see a fractured, exhausted prog rock band transform into a unified pop rock powerhouse.
And they achieved it all by stripping away pretense, locking themselves in a farmhouse, and trusting their collective improvisational instincts.
It's a massive achievement.
Which leaves us with a lingering concept not previously discussed. We often associate artistic maturity with increasing complexity, adding more layers, more instruments, more difficult time signatures.
It's the natural instinct to show off what you've learned.
But the 1983 Genesis album suggests a radical alternative. What if true artistic mastery isn't about how much complexity you can create, but rather how much complexity you are willing to strip away to find the raw, beating heart of a song?
Does true progress in a progressive rock band eventually mean abandoning the genre entirely to find a new voice?
It's a fascinating thought. I want you to ponder this the next time you hear Mama or That's All on the radio. Don't just hear the pop hits. Think about the farmhouse, the shape sorter toy, and the jumping amplifier. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive into the sources with us today.